The issues with the Sewerage and Water Board seem to be mounting, from the August floods last year to this past weekend's boil water advisory. And we can't forget the extremely high bills for many customers. That includes one business owner in the French Quarter who is fighting an outrageously high bill.
His bill, $20,000, and that bill could shut down his small business. Jacqueline Quinn has his story.
You know, we're not a Harrah's Casino or a Superdome.
No, the Black Penny is just a small neighborhood bar nestled in the historic French Quarter with one of the largest selections of craft beer. And given that the building is quite old, space behind the counter is tight. And to make the most use of space, most things come in a can or bottle. Notably, this cuts down on water usage.
My bill goes like this, and in 1 month it goes.
But this August, the bar's owner, Michael West, shows us his water bill spiked from $450 per month to a massive $20,000.
If I am using the water, then I should have to pay for that.
However, West says he didn't use that much, and there are no leaks. We looked around and into his bill. On average, he uses 1,500 gallons a day, or about 42,000 gallons during a 28-day billing cycle.
So in August, when his bill spiked to 1 million gallons, that would have been about 36,000 gallons in a single day and 25 times his daily average usage.
There's really no explanation for it.
We contacted the Sewerage and Water Board about this bill, asking if someone entered the values incorrectly and what's being done to fix it. A press secretary emailed a response explaining customers should dispute these bills by calling, emailing, or coming into a location to talk with a rep. And that since the start of the year, the board has been working on software to improve billing reliability. When we asked for clarification, well, we received the same response. West now worries about paying a bill based on $20,000.
But what if I get another one of these next month?
He plans to dispute the bill. In the meantime, he also wants to find others who have had the same issue and take these problems to the board. In the French Quarter, Jacqueline Quinn, Eyewitness News.